Hey guys. Tonight, we slip quietly into the dim glow of Leonardo da Vinci's workshop. Yes, that workshop. The one stacked so high with scraps of parchment and half-finished contraptions that you're already wondering how he didn't set the entire place on fire. You can almost smell the mix of ink, wood shavings, warm beeswax, and that faint metallic tang of tools that have been sharpened one too many times. The candles flicker against stone walls, throwing shadows that look suspiciously like wings, wheels, and strange little creatures he probably meant to build someday. And you're standing right there in the doorway, barefoot, completely unprepared for what this night is about to reveal. And just so you know, you probably won't survive this. Not because of danger, but because Leonardo's brain operates at such a frantic, cosmic speed that any normal person trying to follow along would simply short-circuit. Imagine having 10 browser tabs open. Now multiply that by 500 and add a few loose sketches of helicopters and robot knights. That's Leonardo on a slow day. Meanwhile, you're already overwhelmed, just trying not to trip on the floor clutter. Good luck. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always incredible seeing where everyone is listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take one cautious step forward, and instantly, you feel the crunch of something under your heel. Don't worry, it's only a small wooden gear, not a priceless historical artifact. Probably. The room pulses with quiet energy, as if the sketches themselves are inhaling and exhaling. Every surface is covered. Towering stacks of paper tied with twine, jars of pigment that look like crystallized sunsets, scraps of leather, twisted springs, tiny copper pieces, and an entire colony of quills that seem to multiply when you blink. Leonardo himself is nowhere in sight, but his presence is so intense it feels like he's standing right behind you, breathing down your neck and judging your posture. Historians love debating whether Leonardo was tidy or messy, but based on the absolute chaos in front of you, it's safe to assume he lived his life inside a permanent, creative tornado. And honestly, it makes sense. How else could he have invented half the things he did? A cold draft slips through the cracked window, rustling a stack of notebooks. You watch one page flutter upward like a startled bird. On it is a rough sketch, wings stretching out, thin rods supporting a body harness, a system of pulleys that looks just complicated enough to break your arms and spirit simultaneously. Your eyes widen. It's one of his early flying machine drafts. You've barely arrived, and already the workshop is throwing masterpieces at you like confetti. You lean in closer. This is where the fun begins, because Leonardo didn't just sketch a machine. He sketched the experience of flying. He drew a man suspended mid-air, his limbs stretched out like an athlete, feathers etched with obsessive care. This is that mainstream historical fact you've probably heard. Leonardo dreamed of human flight centuries before anyone got off the ground. But what the documentaries rarely mention is how he kept rewriting the physics every other week, sometimes improving his designs, sometimes making them stranger, sometimes scribbling frustrated notes like, "No, this will not do." Very relatable, honestly. As you tilt the page, a tiny detail catches your eye, something quirky, almost too odd to believe. On one corner, he added an alternative design shaped like a giant bat wing, except the human operator looks like he's wearing a Renaissance-era Halloween costume. Historians still argue whether Leonardo genuinely intended to mimic bats, or whether he was simply doodling after an exceptionally dramatic evening. Given his track record, either is plausible. You wander further into the room, weaving through scattered tools. A half-assembled wing frame leans against a table like it's been waiting centuries for someone to notice it. Touch it lightly, and the wood creaks, old but stubbornly alive. This thing was meant to move, meant to flap, meant to carry someone who believed in it enough to leap into the unknown. But Leonardo himself never tried to fly. And that's the part that always surprises people. He was a visionary, yes, but also deeply aware of how painful gravity can be when it gets the final word. You pass a cluster of small clay models, tiny test structures he built before committing to larger designs. One looks like a prototype gear mechanism. Another resembles an early draft of a turret, and one, impossibly, looks like a little creature with many legs. You're not sure if it's an insect study or something he meant to animate later, Knowing him, it could be both. A soft scratching sound makes you turn. The far table is littered with knives, brushes, and inkstones, each arranged with the kind of deliberate placement only a perfectionist could manage. It's funny, amid all the chaos, the tools of craft are aligned like soldiers. You imagine Leonardo sitting exactly where you stand, hunched over a page for hours without blinking, stopping only when the candle burned down to a puddle. Your fingers brush the edge of a thick notebook tied with cord. You pause. Should you open it? Of course you should. This is a bedtime story. The knot slips free, and suddenly pages spill out like a waterfall of secrets. Some are filled with crisp, confident lines. Others are smudged, grey ghosts of ideas he abandoned halfway through. But every single one radiates that feverish brilliance, the kind that feels heavy and fragile at the same time. One page in particular stands out, a spinning mechanism with curved blades. At first glance it looks harmless, almost elegant, but then your sleepy brain catches up. This isn't a toy, it's a weapon concept. And not just any weapon. It's a prototype for a machine that could slice through the air with terrifying efficiency. Leonardo's patrons were powerful men, and they paid him well to design things that could tip the balance of war. But here's the twist. He often hid, or intentionally complicated his own military sketches to keep them from being built too easily. Historians still argue whether this was moral hesitation or sheer perfectionism. You can decide which explanation helps you sleep better. A candle sputters, and the workshop plunges into thicker shadows. You inhale slowly. The air smells ancient, illuminated by the quiet hum of imagination. You're no longer a visitor, you're drifting through Leonardo's mind, one sketch at a time, following the trail of a genius who created faster than the world could understand. And with that, the night deepens, and the workshop prepares to show you something even stranger. You take another slow step deeper into the workshop, and the temperature seems to shift around you, as if the very air is reacting to your presence. Somewhere behind a pile of dusty folios, a wooden beam pops softly, like the studio itself is stretching after centuries of being quiet. And then you hear it. A faint shuffling, a tiny clink of metal. The unmistakable sound of someone pacing while thinking too hard. That's your first clue. Leonardo da Vinci is awake, and his brain is already 3 ideas ahead of you. You turn toward the source of the sound, and there he is, half silhouetted in the candlelight, moving like he's conducting an invisible orchestra. Leonardo always paced when he worked through problems. It's a fact historians love to bring up, especially when describing how he'd go from sketching to pacing to muttering to chiseling to pacing again, all in 1 minute. Watching him now, you get it. His mind isn't a straight line, it's a pinball machine, and the ball is ricocheting everywhere at once. He doesn't see you at first. He's too busy arguing with himself under his breath, scribbling something on one sheet, abandoning it for another, drawing a perfect geometric figure, smudging it out, flipping a page, pacing again. You realize you're witnessing peak Leonardo, restless, brilliant, and mildly chaotic. For one brief moment, he stops, just freezes. You hold your breath. His eyes widen, and with the dramatic flair of someone revealing a secret recipe, he whispers not to you, but to the room itself. No, that won't work, but this might. Then he darts to a nearby table, leaving you stumbling to catch up. You edge closer, and your jaw drops just a little. It's a sheet of paper covered in early concept sketches for a flying machine, but not the elegant gliders. Everyone knows. These are rough, almost frantic. One shows paddles attached to a man's arms. Another looks like someone strapped to a rotating fan blade, honestly. It resembles a Renaissance-era blender more than an aircraft. You try not to laugh, but your brain slips out a quiet, "Oh no." Joke number 1. Accomplished. Leonardo doesn't react. His world is too loud inside his head. He dips a quill into ink with practiced speed and makes a long, sweeping stroke across the page. Ink splatters. He doesn't care. He's thinking faster than his hand can move, faster than the ink can dry. You hover inches behind him, close enough to feel the faint warmth of candlelight bouncing off his robes. He's muttering about lift and drag, though he doesn't have modern words for it. Instead, he calls them forces of the heavy body wanting the earth, and the light body wanting the heavens. Poetic, dramatic, classic, Leonardo. A mainstream historical fact floats through your mind. Leonardo recorded more than 13,000 pages of notes, diagrams, and ideas, far more than anyone around him could ever comprehend. But he wrote them in such rapid, swirling bursts that many concepts never fully left draft form. You're seeing why. This man's brain simply doesn't stop. He suddenly flings his quill onto the table, it bounces and nearly stabs your foot, which feels rude and reaches for a wooden model. The thing is tiny, barely the size of your palm, and shaped like a twisted spiral. You recognize it immediately. The aerial screw, the ancestor of the helicopter. At least, that's what modern engineers call it. Leonardo had loftier names, like the instrument that subdues the air, which honestly sounds like a spell from a fantasy novel. You gently pick up the model, turning it between your fingers. The spiral is made of linen, stretched over reeds, hardened with glue. Lightweight, elegant, and utterly impractical with the materials of his time. Historians still argue whether Leonardo intended this machine to actually fly, or whether it was more of a conceptual demonstration proof that air could be pushed downward to lift a craft upward. Even today, that debate has conferences hissing like angry geese. Leonardo glances at you for the first time. He raises an eyebrow, not surprised, not alarmed, just vaguely annoyed that you're touching his model without washing your hands. His eyes, dark and sharp, scan you from head to toe. For a second, you think he's about to lecture you on mechanical engineering. Instead, he blurts out something completely unexpected. Do you know why birds do not fall? He waits. You scramble mentally. Because wings? You whisper. He sighs. Deeply. Loudly. The sigh of a man who has been surrounded by people who don't get it for his entire life. But then, he softens. Wings. Yes, he murmurs. But not only wings. They fly because they understand the air. And before you can ask what on earth that means, he whirls back to his sketches. You follow him, careful not to step on a stack of folded manuscripts. One slips, revealing a quirky detail, a doodle of a man wearing a feathered coat, arms outstretched like a dramatic theatre actor. Beneath it, Leonardo has scribbled something loosely translated to, "If I dress him like this, perhaps he can take to the sky." Historians still argue whether he meant it seriously, or whether this was Leonardo's version of doodling in the margins during a boring meeting. He pauses again, staring at a blank page like it personally insulted him. You can almost feel him weighing a dozen ideas in his head, trying to decide which one deserves ink. His fingers twitch. His jaw tightens slightly. And then, with a whispered, "Enough," he sweeps all his scattered designs aside and begins sketching something entirely new. You lean in slowly, carefully, and watch as he draws a machine with articulated parts, pulleys, gears, flaps. Not flying, not spinning, walking. A mechanical walker. Something he clearly has no client for. No reason to design. No audience to impress. He's making it because he can't not make it. And just like that, you understand why he scribbled ideas in mirror writing, why he hoarded notebooks, why he never published most of what he created. His inventions weren't performances, they were compulsions. They spilled out of him like breath. Another candle sputters. The shadows shift again, and you realize you're witnessing a genius desperately trying to catch up with his own mind, one restless step at a time. You barely have time to blink before Leonardo is off again, flitting across the workshop like a bird who refuses to accept the concept of walls. He sweeps past jars of pigment, nudges aside a box of metal hinges with his foot, and plants himself in front of a tall rack overflowing with rolled parchment. Each scroll is wedged in at a slightly wrong angle, like someone shoved them. There, during a moment of intellectual panic, which, to be fair, might describe most of Leonardo's life. He pulls one scroll free, rattling the entire rack like a shaky Renaissance vending machine, then unfurls it across a wide table marked by burn rings and ink stains. You step closer, and the parchment sprawls open like wings appropriate, because the drawing staring up at you is unmistakably one of his flying machines. Except this one isn't delicate, or angelic, or poetic. No, this contraption looks like something between a giant mechanical bird and a medieval torture exercise. Thick beams form the body, 2 massive wings stretch outward on pivoting joints, and dozens of pulleys snake across the design like tangled headphones. You take one look at the harness at the center and think, ah, yes, the Renaissance gym membership guaranteed to tone your arms or kill you trying. Leonardo watches your expression with subtle amusement. He knows exactly how absurd some of these flying machines appear. But that's the thing, you're not seeing failure. You're seeing experimentation, iteration, a mind desperate to figure out what the sky requires. He taps the drawing lightly. This one, he murmurs, would move like the bird, but strengthened by the man. His voice softens, almost wistful. You can tell he believes humans should fly, even if the laws of physics haven't sent him the memo yet. A mainstream historical fact flickers through your mind. Leonardo's flying machines were some of the earliest serious studies of aerodynamics in Western history. He wasn't just doodling birds. He dissected them, analyzed airflow, copied nature, and then tried to beat nature at its own game. These designs might look wild to modern eyes, but for the late 1400s, they were seismic. You reach out and trace the lines of the wing mechanism. The feathers, drawn with ridiculous precision, each have individual strokes. He shaded them lightly, making the wings seem as if they're already catching the light of an imaginary sky. You can almost hear them rustle. Then something catches your attention on the bottom corner, a tiny sketch of a man mid-flight. Leonardo has drawn him soaring over mountains, arms outstretched, looking annoyingly graceful for someone strapped to nearly 60 pounds of wood and rope. Beneath it, Leonardo wrote a quick note, half in code, half in poetry. If the man understands the beat of the wings, he becomes part of the air. Historians still argue whether Leonardo meant this literally or whether he was just getting dramatic at 3 a.m. But there's more on the table, another sheet half hidden beneath the main drawing. You pull it forward. It's a strange variant, a wingless flying apparatus shaped more like a glider. The body is streamlined, curved like a manta ray. No flapping, no pulleys, just pure glide. This is Leonardo's quieter idea, the one he returned to again and again, letting the air carry you instead of forcing it to obey. Engineers today say this was his closest brush with something that could have truly lifted a person. But here's the quirky tidbit. He sketched the operator lying face down in the glider, arms out like Superman, wearing something that looks suspiciously like leather goggles. Did Leonardo invent the first flying helmet? Possibly. Or maybe he was just tired and drawing accessories for fun. Leonardo leans over the table, brushing the parchment with the back of his knuckles, lost in thought. His eyes dart between sketches, assembling ideas in real time. You can practically hear gears turning in his brain. For a man centuries ahead of his world, he's still somehow impatient about not being even further ahead. He lifts a wooden prototype, a small wing model with adjustable joints, and hands it to you. It's lighter than you expect, balanced perfectly at the center. When you tilt it, the joints shift with smooth resistance, mimicking the way a bird adjusts each feather in flight. Leonardo designed this just to study motion. The patience behind it is unreal. You hold the wing up to the candle, and it casts a shadow, like a great bird stretching across the ceiling. Leonardo follows your gaze, then nods, silently approving the effect. The air must be persuaded, he says, not forced. You watch him scribble a quick revision into the margin of a sketch, just a small change, barely noticeable, but he treats it like he's just solved a puzzle that's been haunting him all week. That's the thing with him. Every stray thought is a discovery. He moves again, swift, precise. He lifts a stack of notebooks and flips until he finds a page filled with notes on wind pressure. The way he documented the behavior of air remains one of the earliest examples of aerodynamic thinking. He'd toss handfuls of sand into the wind just to see how the grains curved. He'd watch birds hover and scribble notes faster than his assistants could blink. He approached flight with the intensity of someone preparing for a job interview with gravity itself. Then Leonardo pauses, looks at you, actually studies your face this time. You wonder if man can fly, he says, but you forget to ask whether the sky accepts him. He smiles faintly, almost mischievous. One day, perhaps, but not with wood and rope. He turns away again, flipping another parchment open, this one showing an early parachute concept, a pyramid of cloth held by rigid rods. Historians still argue whether this parachute could have worked. Some believe the materials were too heavy. Others think the design was brilliant, but needed more testing. What's undeniable is this. Leonardo was thinking about controlled descent long before controlled ascent was even remotely possible. You take one final look at the sprawling table, covered in wings, spirals, gliders, diagrams, angles, animals, notes written backward, and a small doodle of a guy who looks unusually stressed, dangling from a rope. Somehow, it all fits. This is a mind refusing to let the sky stay a mystery. And tonight, you've only seen the first pieces. Leonardo barely gives you time to admire the gliders before he pivots, literally pivots, toward another cluttered corner of the workshop. His robes flare dramatically, which is honestly impressive for a man who hasn't slept since, well, judging by the ink stains and general vibe, since the last papal administration. He stops at a squat wooden table covered in tiny wheels, gears, and little carved blocks that look like miniature furniture for a dollhouse you definitely don't want to play with. He clears space with one decisive sweep of his arm, papers scatter. A quill dives to its death. Something ceramic rolls away with a pitiful clink, and then he grabs a chunk of oak. You watch him tighten a screw, twist a peg, and adjust a tension rope with the concentration of someone performing Renaissance brain surgery. And then, with a faint grunt, he reveals it. A compact wooden frame with wheels and a complex series of springs coiled beneath its open top. You blink. Is that a car? Yes. Yes, it is. Leonardo da Vinci has just unveiled the world's first self-propelled cart, essentially a robot vehicle without an engine, centuries before combustion engines even existed. It's one of those inventions nobody told you about in school, probably because even the teachers needed time to emotionally process it. The little cart sits there innocently, with its angled gears and taut springs ready to unleash kinetic chaos. Leonardo taps the side proudly. "This one moves without being pushed," he declares, which is basically Renaissance slang for, "Welcome to the future. You're not ready." You kneel down, peering beneath the cart's frame. The mechanics are shockingly modern: coiled leaf springs, gear differentials, and a tension release system that looks suspiciously like the great-great-great-grandfather of the wind-up toy. A mainstream historical fact glimmers. In 2004, engineers actually built a working replica of this cart, based entirely on Leonardo's sketches, and it worked. It really, genuinely rolled forward on its own. Leonardo winds the springs in a smooth, practiced motion. The coils tighten, squeaking softly. He gives you a quick glance, as if to say, "Stand back unless you want ankle problems." You obediently scoot away. He releases the latch. The cart lurches forward with an enthusiastic BZTCHK. It rumbles across the table, wheels spinning faster than seems reasonable, and shoots straight toward a stack of parchment. You brace for impact. Leonardo does nothing. The cart hits the papers, the stack collapses like a tragic souffle, and the vehicle keeps going until it crashes into a paint jar, splashing blue pigment everywhere. Leonardo nods, satisfied. "See? It moves." You can't help but laugh, which earns you a mild side-eye from the master inventor. Joke number one of this section accomplished. But the cart isn't done surprising you. Leonardo retrieves it and flips the top panel open to reveal a strange mechanism of cams and notched gears. He twists a rod, and the front wheels shift inward at a precise angle. "It can turn," he says, as if casually announcing the invention of steering. Your eyebrows shoot up. This is the quirky tidbit. Leonardo designed a programmable steering system into a machine that predates the automobile by nearly 400 years. And while historians can't fully agree on whether he intended this for theatre props, military drills, or pure experimentation, they do agree on this. The design proves a conceptual understanding of robotics far earlier than anyone expected. Leonardo picks up another parchment from the floor, one that fell earlier, and lays it flat. This sheet shows a more detailed version of the cart, including internal gears labeled with mirror-writing notes. You try reading them, but your brain short-circuits. He scribbled something about motion stored like breath in the springs, which is very poetic for a guy inventing an autonomous machine. He taps the spiral spring in the drawing. "Power that sleeps," he mutters, "until you wake it." The phrase hangs in the air. You watch Leonardo tinker with the cart's gear ratio. For a few seconds, he forgets the entire world exists and leans close enough for you to smell ink and warm metal. He adjusts a pin, checks the alignment, winds it again, and with the confidence of a man who ignores failure as a concept, lets it loose once more. This time the cart rolls smoothly, making a gentle arc across the table like a tiny wooden ballet dancer. It even slows down gracefully as the springs unwind. You can't help it, you clap softly. Leonardo pretends he doesn't hear you, but he definitely does. Now comes the open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Leonardo created this cart as a theatrical automaton for stage plays. Moving props were popular in Renaissance entertainment, or whether it was a serious experiment in mechanical autonomy. Some argue it was a toy for the Duke's amusement. Others insist it was a secret demonstration of potential military logistics. And a small group believes it was just Leonardo staying up far too late and making cool stuff because boredom was his natural enemy. Leonardo picks up the cart, gently brushing off the paint splatter with his sleeve. "Things that move by themselves," he whispers. "These will change the world." His eyes gleam not with pride, but with possibility. To him, this isn't a one-off invention. It's a stepping stone, a hint, a whisper of what machines might become. You feel a strange sensation in your chest, like you've glimpsed the origins of automation itself. And in this dusty workshop, surrounded by feathers, gears, parchment, and the master himself, the idea begins to feel alive, almost breathing. Leonardo sets the cart aside carefully. "Come," he says, beckoning you deeper into the shadows. "There is something else I want you to see. Something that imitates the body, more faithfully than this." You swallow. The workshop suddenly feels warmer. He's talking about another invention, one more ambitious, more eerie, and it's walking toward you. Before you can ask what on earth he means by something that imitates the body, Leonardo sweeps across the workshop with the silent confidence of a man who routinely builds things no one asked for, but everyone should be grateful. He moves toward a tall, wooden cabinet, tucked behind a stack of stretched canvases. It looks ordinary, innocent, even, which is your first warning that whatever sits inside is about to ruin your ability to sleep comfortably in a dark room ever again. He unlatches the cabinet door with a soft click. The hinges groan, and the door swings open, revealing, oh no, oh absolutely not. Standing inside, slumped slightly forward like it's been waiting centuries for a dramatic entrance, is a human-sized figure made of wood, leather, pulleys, and metal plates. Its chest is broad, its arms are articulated, and its face mercifully is nothing more than a smooth wooden mask. But the shape is unmistakable. You're staring at Leonardo da Vinci's mechanical knight. Your brain tries to process this calmly. It fails. The figure looks like a medieval suit of armor, fused with a marionette and a wind-up toy. Its limbs are jointed with careful precision, each tendon represented by cords tied through tiny hinges. The torso contains layered wooden plates that mimic ribs. Its wrists rotate. Its fingers curl slightly inward, as if frozen mid-gesture. If this thing stood up on its own, you would probably die instantly, not from danger, just from sheer emotional overload. Leonardo gestures you closer. "He can move," he says with a touch of pride, "if you know how to speak his language." You swallow. Does the language involve a priest?" He smirks very faintly. "That counts as your first joke landing in this section." You inch forward, taking in every detail. This isn't a rough prototype. This is deliberate, thought out. A mechanical anatomy study disguised as a knight. And it's exactly the kind of invention that makes you wonder whether Leonardo was born in the wrong millennium. A mainstream historical fact floats to the surface of your mind. The mechanical knight, sketched around 1495, is believed to be the world's first programmable humanoid automaton. Leonardo's notes described pulleys and cables inside the armor that allowed it to sit, stand, wave its arms, and even lift its visor. Modern roboticists reconstructed it in the early 2000s using his documents, and it worked. It moved exactly as he designed it to. Leonardo reaches into the knight's ribcage, yes. You just watched him open the chest cavity like he's checking someone's lungs and adjusts a series of internal pulleys. They shift with smooth resistance, running across tiny grooved wheels. The sound is faint but sharp, like a harp strung with metal wire. "This is not magic," he murmurs. "Only motion captured with patience." You lean closer. The mechanism inside is a labyrinth of cords that connect every limb. Pull one loop, and the arm shifts. Pull another, and the torso bends. It's a Renaissance puppet, built with surgeon-level attention. But the most fascinating part? The gears are designed so movements can be preset, Leonardo essentially built a programmable robot before anyone had even invented the concept of programming. You whisper, "Why build this?" Leonardo tilts his head, considering. "To understand the body," he finally says. "Only when you build a man can you appreciate the miracle." You're not sure whether that's profound or mildly concerning. Maybe both. Then he lifts the knight's right arm slightly, just enough to show the internal tension. You watch the elbow bend with eerie realism. The movement is stiff, yes, but unmistakably human-like. It feels like a first moment in history when a human made something else, almost alive. Then comes the quirky tidbit. Tucked behind the knight's knee joint, carved very small, is a little doodle of a cat. Just a cat, sitting, doing absolutely nothing relevant. Did Leonardo add a tiny wooden cat signature inside a robot leg? Apparently yes. Historians still argue whether he put it there as a joke, a signature, or a note for apprentices. Some believe Leonardo just liked cats and hid them in places the same way modern artists sneak Easter eggs into movies. Leonardo pulls a cord gently, and the knight's torso shifts forward as if preparing to stand. Your entire soul evacuates your body. He stops before the figure actually rises, either because he's merciful or because he sees the panic in your eyes. "It can walk," he says quietly, though slowly, like a child learning its steps. You're breathing a little faster now, not out of fear, but out of the uncanny realization that this workshop contains the seed of robotics. This wooden knight, this creaking, clicking assemblage is the ancestor of every modern robot that moves, waves, or opens a door. But then comes the open scholarly debate. Historians still argue what Leonardo intended this automaton for. Some claim it was designed for court entertainment, a theatrical spectacle to amuse the Duke's guests. Others suggest Leonardo built it as an exploratory study, an engineering challenge meant to mirror human motion. And a small, intriguing group argues he may have had military purposes in mind, imagining armored machines marching into battle. The truth? Hidden in scribbled pages, half-lost diagrams, and scattered notes that never fully explain his intent. Leonardo closes the knight's chest cavity gently, like a doctor finishing an exam. Then he steps back, admiring it with a quiet fondness, usually reserved for beloved pets or difficult inventions. "This one," he says softly, "is too far ahead for them. They want swords and horses. They are not ready for this." He's right. In his century, this invention would have been misunderstood or worse, misused. You let your gaze drift over the knight one more time. The wooden plates, the knotted cords, the balanced tension, the quiet dignity in its stance. It feels like a relic from a future that never happened. Leonardo turns away first. "Come," he says, lighting another candle with deliberate care. "Tonight we walk beneath the water, not above it." You blink. "Beneath the water?" He nods once, with that casual air of someone announcing the invention of scuba gear centuries before Jacques Cousteau. The knight watches silently as you follow its creator deeper into the workshop, toward a table scattered with sketches of masks, tubes, bags, and something that looks very much like a Renaissance-era diving suit. Leonardo guides you to a long, low workbench pressed against the far wall, one you somehow hadn't noticed before, which is suspicious because it's covered in enough leather straps and hollow tubes to look like either an experimental diving apparatus or the world's least comforting spa treatment. He strikes a fresh flame, setting a row of candles glowing. Their light spills across parchment sketches, illuminating shapes that feel strangely modern. Masks, air bladders, valves, and weighted boots. You freeze. Weighted boots. Leonardo grins an actual grin, the kind that says, "Yes, I wrote backwards, built robot knights, and invented helicopters. But watch this." He lifts a large parchment, rolls it flat, and taps the center with the tip of his finger. It's a man in a suit head to toe wearing what looks like a leather hood with glass portholes for eyes, long tubes snaking upward, and a chest piece made from stitched animal hide. He's holding onto a coil of rope and a blade, because apparently underwater subtlety is optional in the Renaissance. You whisper, "Is that a diving suit?" Leonardo beams. "A way to breathe beneath the water," he corrects, because of course he does. You lean in closer. The details are wild. He sketched something like an early snorkel system, using floating cork buoys to keep the air tubes above water. The visor is sealed with pitch and wax, and the entire suit is reinforced with flexible leather, so the diver wouldn't freeze instantly in cold water. Then you catch something else, a second drawing, slightly smaller, showing a man cutting a ship's mooring ropes beneath the surface. And just like that, the reality clicks. This wasn't meant for exploration. It was meant for sabotage. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your thoughts. Leonardo designed this early diving suit for the rulers of Venice, who were constantly at war and paranoid about naval attacks. The idea was simple: send divers beneath enemy ships to disable them stealthily. But Leonardo ultimately hid or downplayed this invention, fearing it would be used for harm. It's one of several creations he intentionally buried. Leonardo traces one of the tubes on the parchment. "The sea can be a friend," he murmurs, "but men make enemies of everything." You glance at him, startled. He's serious, almost heavy-hearted. It's a rare mood for him. Like the water sketches stir some deeper caution. Then you notice a quirky little detail. In the corner of the drawing, Leonardo added a tiny doodle of a fish wearing a helmet. The expression on the fish is deeply unimpressed. You try to hold in a laugh, but it escapes your nose in a tiny snort. Leonardo turns, eyebrow raised. You point at the fish. He squints, then waves a hand dismissively. "The apprentices get bored," he says. "You're not convinced. That fish has Leonardo-level drama." You pick up one of the prototype masks from the table. The leather is stiff but meticulously stitched. The glass portholes are round and almost perfectly smooth, astonishing for the era. You tilt it, and candlelight ripples through the lenses like moonlight underwater. Leonardo takes the mask from your hands and flip it around to show the inside. The seals look surprisingly airtight. "With oil and wax," he says. "It holds against the water. You can't help yourself. Have you tested it?" He gives you a long, haunted look. "Once," he says. "Never again." His eyes shift away, and you wish you could ask more, but he's already moving on, grabbing a long leather hose. He lifts another parchment, a diagram of an underwater breathing system, using hollow reeds that extend to floating air reservoirs on the surface. The reeds look delicate, almost fragile, which leads you to the obvious conclusion. The first person to test this system probably had a very stressful day. Leonardo watches you studying it. "Breathing is simple," he says. "Keeping air dry is the difficulty." Historians still argue whether this line, recorded in one of his notebooks, was referring to the diving suit or one of his unrelated experiments with airflow. Given the context, both interpretations make sense. He takes your hand gently, just enough to guide you to another sketch pinned against the wall. This one shows a person descending using weighted boots shaped like the bottoms of miniature anvils. You blink. These look painful. Very painful. Leonardo nods at your reaction. "He must sink easily," he explains, "or he will waste all his strength fighting the surface." You make a face. He chuckles softly. "Yes, it is unpleasant. Most worthwhile ideas are." He gestures at a small wooden container resting beside the boots. Inside are bits of coiled brass, early prototypes for valves. Leonardo experimented with air regulation centuries before anyone had formal terminology for it. Even now, the little brass pieces look futuristic in their simplicity. But then, the atmosphere shifts. Leonardo's shoulders tense, as if he senses something approaching the edge of morality. He closes the diving suit sketch slowly, almost reverently, then sets a piece of parchment on top of it like a shroud. "I kept these hidden," he says quietly. "War should not reach the bottom of the sea." You feel that sentence weigh on you more deeply than expected. This isn't the brilliant, restless inventor you've been following. This is the human behind the genius. The man who feared how much destruction could sprout from unchecked ideas. And then, the scholarly debate enters your mind. Historians still argue whether Leonardo truly concealed the diving suit intentionally, whether he abandoned it because the materials weren't advanced enough, or whether it simply got lost among his overwhelming notebooks. Some theorize he withheld it because he feared misuse. Others believe it was just another invention, swallowed by time and disorganization. Leonardo walks away from the table, pausing only to run his fingers along a mask hook as if saying goodbye. Then, he turns back to you, the weight slowly lifting from his expression. "There is one invention," he says, voice lighter now, "that needs no hiding. It wants only the open sky." You tilt your head. Another flying machine? He shakes his head with a spark of mischief. No, a fall machine. You blink. A what machine? He gestures toward a canvas draped in the corner, shaped suspiciously like a pyramid, and you suddenly realize Leonardo is about to show you his parachute. Leonardo crosses the workshop with the kind of enthusiasm you've only ever seen in people showing off a new puppy or an especially chaotic taxidermy project. He reaches the tall, draped canvas in the corner and gives it a quick, dramatic flick. The cloth falls away in a soft heap, and there it is, leaning awkwardly against the wall like a folded tent someone gave up trying to assemble. A pyramid of linen. Stiff, angular, purposeful. You're looking at one of Leonardo da Vinci's strangest, boldest, sure this won't kill you ideas, his early parachute. He runs his palm along the fabric, revealing a wooden framework beneath the linen 4 long ribs that form a pyramid, each tied at the top with a tight leather joint. At the bottom is a harness, simple but sturdy, clearly meant to cradle an unlucky or heroic, depending on your interpretation, human being mid-fall. You step closer and notice the fabric texture. Thick, waxed linen, surprisingly heavy. The seams are reinforced with double stitching. And the wood? Smooth, polished, lightweight. This isn't a random experiment. This is engineering. Leonardo taps the frame with a knuckle. If a man has this, he says, he may jump from any height and take no harm. You blink. Any height? He nods with absolute confidence. Any. Your eyebrows rise. Even yes, he interrupts before you finish. Even that. And there it is, your first joke opportunity of the section, you murmur. Just checking. Didn't want to assume gravity works differently in Italy. Leonardo snorts an actual tiny snort. You treasure it instantly. He gestures to a parchment pinned to the wall. The sketch shows a man suspended beneath the pyramid chute, descending gracefully. Or at least, Leonardo wants it to look graceful. The drawn man's expression is ambiguous, somewhere between serene enlightenment and mild terror. The edges of the drawing are filled with notes in mirror writing, talking about air resistance, weight, and the lifting nature of the air. He was circling around aerodynamic concepts centuries before the vocabulary existed. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Leonardo's parachute design was the first recorded attempt in Western history to create a controlled fall device. No one else in his time was seriously thinking about preventing deadly impacts. They were too busy worrying about, plagues and invading armies. Leonardo alone looked at cliffs and towers and thought, what if we fall, gently? You crouch next to the wooden frame, looking up through the pyramid. The structure is mathematically precise, each rib forming equal angles, the linen forming perfect triangular planes. It's oddly beautiful, like a futuristic tent built by monks. Leonardo crouches beside you. The air, he says softly, is like water. If you give it a wide enough surface, it resists you. He spreads his hands, mimicking the shape of the chute. This shape catches the air like a sail. You look at the chute, then at the ceiling, then at Leonardo. The man has invented downward sailing, Renaissance parasailing, sky slow cooking, gravity management. You're not sure what to call it, but you respect it. Then you notice a quirky little detail. On one corner of the drawing, Leonardo doodled a second figure, someone landing on their feet, arms raised triumphantly. But the little person looks oddly squishy, like they're soft as a pillow. Did Leonardo doodle an early stickman victory pose? Or was it his cheeky way of saying, see, they survive? Historians still argue. One expert insists the stick figure represents Leonardo himself. Another says it was probably an apprentice mocking the idea. And a third suggests Leonardo drew it to visualize posture during landing. Honestly, it could be any of those. Leonardo stands and gestures upward. It must be dropped from somewhere high. A tower, perhaps. A cliff. He pauses, eyes twinkling. Or the dome of a cathedral. You stare. He stares back. He is absolutely serious. And that leads you right into the open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Leonardo ever tested this parachute. There's no clear record. Some believe he lacked access to a tall enough platform. Others claim he sketched it as a theoretical exercise. And a few believe, based on cryptic notes, that he may have tested a smaller prototype in private. But here's the twist. In 2000, A skydiver named Adrian Nicholas built Leonardo's parachute exactly as drawn. No modern materials, no tweaks, and jumped with it. And it worked. He floated safely. Leonardo's idea, 500 years late, finally breathed. You turn back to the real device in the workshop. The linen pyramid rustles faintly as a breeze slips through a cracked window. The top joints sway slightly. Candlelight glows against its surfaces, giving it a strange, serene presence, like a giant geometric ghost. Leonardo lifts one corner of the frame. "It must fold like this," he says, bending the rib inward to show the mobility. "A man must carry it on his back." The thought horrifies you. Imagine hiking through the Alps with a wooden pyramid strapped to you, just in case. Not the worst life choice in history, but not top 10 either. He steps back, admiring the invention. The fall, he says, is not the enemy, only the sudden stop. You blink. That's poetic. He shrugs. Everything is, if you write it nicely. The room grows quieter. The parachute creaks softly. Leonardo places his hand on the linen one last time, tracing the seam with the same tenderness he uses for bird wings and mechanical tendons. Then he nods toward another table, one filled with drawings of scaffolding, bridges, and entire city layouts stacked in messy layers. "It is time," he says, "to build something bigger than the man." You tilt your head. Bigger how? He smiles, mischievous, tired, unstoppable. Bigger than every street in Italy. You swallow. Leonardo is about to show you his city of the future. Leonardo leads you toward the largest table in the workshop. A monstrous plank of wood that looks like it was dragged here from a shipyard, and then immediately buried beneath an avalanche of sketches, models, rulers, bits of charcoal, and at least one lonely apple core. He brushes aside the chaos with an elegant sweep of his arm, and an immense parchment unfurls across the tabletop with a papery sigh. Your breath catches. You're looking at a city, his city. A place with wide, symmetrical streets, elegant canals, elevated walkways, and buildings arranged with mathematical precision. It feels strangely modern, like something you'd see in a futuristic video game or a very ambitious urban planning pitch deck. Except this is the 1400s, and you're in the workshop of one man who decided cities should stop being disgusting medieval labyrinths and start being livable. Leonardo points to the tallest structure, a multi-level building with arched corridors and residential spaces stacked like layers of a cake. "Here," he says calmly, "the nobles and merchants." Then he taps the lower level, a wide channel running beneath the building. "And here, the workers, the deliveries, the waste." You blink. "You mean two separate levels of streets?" Leonardo nods, already moving on to the next feature. "The upper for people," he explains. "The lower for carts, horses, and filth." Ah, yes, filth. The unofficial mascot of medieval cities. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Leonardo designed an early concept of a two-level city to combat the brutal reality of urban life. Overcrowding, disease, sewage in the streets, and no real sanitation system. His vision redistributed traffic, separated clean areas from dirty ones, and allowed fresh air to circulate. In essence, he was inventing modern city, zoning before zoning existed. You can't help but smile. "So, less random garbage and horse poop everywhere?" Leonardo smirks. "Less," he repeats, "but never none." That counts as your first joke of the section, accidentally educational humor courtesy of Renaissance urban planning. He points to a long canal cutting through the center of the cityscape. It's deceptively elegant, lined with walkways and small bridges that arc gracefully over the water. But you notice something odd. The corners of the buildings curve inward, as if intentionally shaped to guide airflow. You ask about it, and Leonardo lights up. "The wind," he says, tapping the edge of the drawing. "If the buildings curve, the air moves through the city. The bad air leaves." Ah, miasma theory, the belief that foul air caused disease. A quirky historical tidbit. Leonardo believed fresh air and wide streets could prevent illness. That wasn't fully accurate, but his designs did anticipate the need for ventilation and sanitation long before public health became a concept anyone took seriously. He gestures to another drawing. This one shows a system of underground channels with neat little diagrams of water wheels, pulleys, and sluices. Water must flow, he explains, not sit and rot like soup left too long. You snort. Medieval soup or literal sewage. He side-eyes you. Both. Fair enough. You lean over the parchment. The scale is breathtaking. The city includes elevated pedestrian boulevards, dedicated waste disposal canals, multi-level housing, green courtyards, mapped sunlight angles for optimal warmth, strategically placed wells, and even emergency escape routes. Emergency ménagère. Escape routes. You tilt your head. Leonardo notices. For floods, he says, and for men who arrive with torches. You swallow. Suddenly, medieval city life feels relatable. He lifts another parchment, this one smaller, more frantic. It's covered in quick sketches of staircases, railings, doorways, and ramps. Architectural studies, micro-designs, infrastructure decades ahead of anyone else. He taps a short note, written in mirror script. It says, he translates, people must move easily if they are to live well. You whistle softly. That sounds like something a modern city planner would write. Leonardo shrugs, almost offended by the obviousness of it. It is simply correct. But then, a shadow of frustration crosses his face. He sets the sketches down. The Duke did not want this, he mutters. Too expensive. Too new. And there it is, the open, scholarly debate. Historians still argue why Leonardo's ideal city was never built. Some claim political reluctance. Others point to cost. Some believe the design was ahead of its time, too ambitious for Renaissance Italy. And others suggest Leonardo created it mainly in response to a devastating plague outbreak in Milan, imagining a city cleaner, brighter, and more resistant to disease. You look again at the neatly drawn canals, the well-planned roads, the airy courtyards. You can almost see people strolling above while carts roll below. A city without cramped alleys, without rotting waste, without choking smells. A city someone could breathe in. Leonardo quietly slides a small wooden model across the table. It's a miniature of one of his multi-level buildings, tiny arches, tiny staircases, tiny balconies. You pick it up carefully. It's heavier than you expected, meticulously carved. There's even a little bridge over a canal. And wait, is that a tiny carved cat on the balcony? Yes, it is. Leonardo da Vinci has once again added a random cat to a serious architectural model. You grin. So, urban cats are part of the design? He pretends not to hear you. He steps back from the table, folding his arms. If they built this city, he says softly, the people would live longer, breathe easier, move freely. His eyes grow distant, seeing the world not as it is, but as it should be. Then he sighs, long and low. But ideas are light, he murmurs. Men prefer heavy things. You're about to ask what that means when he turns again sudden, swift, like a candle catching a gust. He reaches for a large canvas, flips it over, and reveals a design so intimidating, so enormous, so absolutely unnecessary that you recoil slightly. A giant crossbow, the size of a house, pointed directly at fate. Leonardo smiles with the calm of a man about to show you something equal parts genius and chaos. It fires, he says quietly, with the strength of many men. You brace yourself. The future city was gentle. This next invention is anything but. Leonardo stands proudly beside the enormous drawing, as if he's unveiling the world's most chaotic Renaissance theme park ride. The canvas stretches nearly the height of the wall, and every inch of it is dominated by one jaw-dropping monstrosity. A crossbow so gigantic it looks like it could launch a small house, or a cow inside a house. Honestly, the scale is irresponsible. The weapon's limbs are thick as tree trunks. Its bowstring is made of twisted bundles of rope thicker than your wrist. And the loading mechanism? A winch so large you'd need a team of extremely muscular choir boys just to crank it halfway. Leonardo taps the frame affectionately, like it's a beloved pet that occasionally eats bystanders. You swallow. So, this is new. He nods. A machine to throw great stones farther than any trebuchet. Of course, a trebuchet wasn't dramatic enough. Leonardo wanted a medieval artillery piece with main character energy. You lean closer to the parchment, tracing the lines with your eyes. The weapon is mounted on an elegant wooden carriage, with wide wheels designed to distribute weight. The bow arms are curved with perfect symmetry, their arcs calculated with obsessive detail. A mainstream historical fact hits you. Leonardo really did design a giant crossbow or ballista for the Duke of Milan. The thing was over 27 meters across in his notes, capable, in theory, of launching massive projectiles across enemy lines with terrifying force. You try to imagine soldiers rolling this behemoth across uneven Italian terrain. The mental image is so ridiculous that joke number one escapes your mouth. Did you design this? Or is this a Renaissance prank? Leonardo gives you the most offended look he has given anyone in the last 5 centuries. It is quite serious, he insists. It is elegant. It is efficient. He points at the bow arms. See how they bend? They store more power than any engine you know. You raise an eyebrow. Engines don't exist yet. He waves a hand like you're being pedantic, which you are. He drags over a stack of supplementary sketches, smaller diagrams showing torsion mechanics, pivot systems, and a ratcheting device meant to pull the massive bowstring back without killing the operators. The secondary diagrams are detailed, precise, and curiously filled with tiny notes written in mirror script. One note reads something roughly like, "Reinforce the arms against splintering." Wood complains loudly. You find that sentence weirdly relatable, but then you spot something delightful, a tiny doodle of a guy being knocked off his feet by recoil. The figure's little arms are flailing. The caption beneath it, "Not recommended." Historians would absolutely fight each other in a parking lot over whether Leonardo drew that for comedic effect or as a warning to apprentices. The debate continues. Leonardo continues his explanation, tapping along the bow's limbs. "The curved arms," he says, "give more elasticity, more range." His tone shifts into lecturer mode. If the arms are too thick, the weapon is strong but stiff. Too thin, and it breaks. Balance is everything. You nod. Like you understand the physics. You do not. He steps aside and gestures for you to sit on the edge of the table. You cautiously obey. He rolls out a smaller parchment showing the crossbow in action, a projectile soaring across a battlefield, scattering enemy lines. Smoke, chaos, everything you'd expect from a Renaissance war sketch. But something about the projectile seems odd. It's shaped strangely. Long, cylindrical, with fins. You lean closer. Is that a missile? Leonardo shrugs, which is not comforting. A dart, perhaps with fire. You blink. Fire. He nods. Men in battle enjoy fire. He says this with the same tone someone uses to describe toddlers enjoying crayons. Here comes the open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Leonardo intended this giant crossbow to be a real military weapon, or whether it was designed to intimidate opponents through sheer psychological impact. One school of thought insists it was never meant to be built, full-scale just as a show weapon to frighten enemies into negotiating. Another group believes Leonardo genuinely intended it to fire massive flaming bolts, and a smaller group suggests he made it deliberately impractical so the Duke wouldn't actually use it. The truth? Lost somewhere between genius, theatrics, and Renaissance politics. Leonardo steps back, folding his arms and admiring the design. "War," he murmurs, "is the worst use of a clever mind." You blink. Then why design this? He sighs, one of those long, slow, Renaissance-exhausted sighs. Because if I do not, someone less careful will, and they will build it poorly. You look again at the monstrous weapon, at the perfect arcs, the careful geometry, the improbable ambition. It's like staring at a dream and a nightmare at the same time. A breeze slips through the workshop window. The parchment rustles. The crossbow seems to breathe. Leonardo gently smooths the edges with his hands and then, with surprising tenderness, he folds the canvas up again. "Enough of this," he says quietly. "There is another machine. One that moves not with ropes or bows, but with the turning of many mouths of fire." Mouths of fire? He leads you toward another canvas, smaller, rounder, shaped faintly like a spinning turtle shell. You feel your pulse quicken. The giant crossbow was dramatic. But the armored tank? The armored tank is destiny. Leonardo rests a hand on the rounded canvas, fingers tapping lightly as if he's checking whether the invention inside is awake. He lifts the cloth slowly, no dramatic flourish this time, just a careful reveal. And there, hunched like a sleeping tortoise forged from nightmares, is one of the wildest machines his mind ever produced. A circular armored vehicle, sloped sides, gun ports arranged around the full ring, a hatch at the top like the lid of a mechanical cauldron. You suck in a breath. Is that a tank? Leonardo tilts his head thoughtfully. A house of war, he says, one that moves. You step closer, and your brain immediately begins malfunctioning. The design looks bizarrely modern, like someone took a World War I machine and reshaped it into a Renaissance UFO. It's built from overlapping wooden plates, reinforced with metal, forming a perfect conical dome. Beneath it, you see wheels, lots of wheels connected by gears in a dizzying dance of motion. He gestures for you to kneel beside him. You crouch, and Leonardo opens a hatch at the base. Inside, the skeletal mechanism reveals itself. A dense cluster of cogs, axles, cranks, and levers. It looks like a clockmaker, and a blacksmith had a very intense argument, and this was the result. This, he says, tapping one of the main gears, is what turns the wheels. You blink, so it's powered? He nods. By men. You imagine 4 unlucky soldiers inside this machine, sweating, dizzy, cranking levers while cannonballs bounce off the exterior. Your brain creates the mental image and immediately regrets it. You whisper, "So, a Renaissance peloton class, but with artillery?" Leonardo actually chuckles. Yes, except there is no instructor shouting encouragement, only death outside. Comforting. He pulls out a parchment, one of the original sketches. You recognize it instantly. The famous armored vehicle drawing from the Codex Arundel. In the center sits a platform for soldiers to rotate the cranks. Around the perimeter, small cannons angled outward, allowing the machine to fire in any direction without exposing the crew. A mainstream historical fact swims up. Leonardo's armored vehicle is widely considered the first conceptual ancestor of the modern tank. Though it was never built in his lifetime, its design shows an unprecedented understanding of mobile armored warfare. Scholars have marveled for centuries at the rotating cannon array, a feature not seen again for hundreds of years. Leonardo points at the cannons. "Fire in all directions," he says softly. "An iron storm." You shiver. The idea is brutal, terrifying, and brilliant, but then you notice something odd, something you weren't expecting. The gears inside don't actually work. They're arranged in such a way that the wheels would turn against each other, making the machine incapable of moving forward. You frown. Leonardo watches you with a tiny, knowing smile. And here comes the quirky tidbit historians love. Some believe Leonardo intentionally sabotaged the design so it could never be successfully built because he feared what his patrons might do with it. The broken gear ratio seems too obvious, too out of character for someone whose mechanical intuition was absurdly precise. Others argue it was simply a mistake, and others still claim he planned to correct it later. But the most popular interpretation? Leonardo was ethically nervous. He built war machines when necessary, but he didn't trust rulers with too much power. You ask him carefully, "Did you do this on purpose?" He looks away, eyes dimming. "Men will always find ways to kill each other," he says. "My task is to make them think first." You let out a slow breath. That answer feels heavier than the machine itself. Leonardo straightens and walks around the vehicle, tapping each bolted plate with his fingertips. "This armor," he explains, "is angled so arrows, and stones slide away, like rain on a roof." You nod. "So it's defensive and offensive at the same time?" He brightens. "Exactly. A shell. A moving fortress." Another parchment shows the tank from above, like a giant spinning starfish. At the center, a small lookout platform where a soldier could open a hatch and observe the battlefield. Leonardo taps this feature. "The eye must see, even if the body hides." You mutter. "Pretty sure that's a deep quote someone's going to misuse on Instagram." Leonardo ignores you. He crouches again, opening another hatch. Inside is a tiny wooden cat carving again. This one is perched on a little ledge next to the crank system. Leonardo pretends not to see your raised eyebrow. You whisper, "So the tank also comes with a cat?" He shrugs. "It keeps the mice out of the gears." Historians still argue whether that's a joke or a serious design note. Leonardo closes the hatch and stands. He brushes dust from the top of the dome, revealing a series of small holes placed in a precise geometric pattern. Ventilation, heat escape, smoke release. The man basically predicted that firing multiple cannons in a sealed space might cause issues, such as cooking the crew alive. Practical. But the real shock is when he begins describing the movement. He grabs a crank model and demonstrates. The men turn this way, he says, and the wheels move the machine forward. If they turn opposite, it rotates like a wheel of fire. You imagine a spinning armored death dome rolling across a battlefield like a weaponized Roomba. A chill runs up your spine. Then comes the open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Leonardo intended the tank to be fully realized, or whether it was more of a conceptual demonstration to impress court patrons. Some believe it was meant to intimidate enemies. Others think it was a technological dream, brilliant but unattainable with the materials of the time. And some suggest Leonardo had moral reservations and intentionally introduced flaws. You stand back and let your eyes roam over the machine. Its curves, its symmetry, its menace. It feels like a relic from a future that never happened, a timeline where Leonardo's ideas reshaped warfare centuries early. Leonardo places one hand on the tank and one on your shoulder. There are things, he murmurs, that man should build, and things he should only imagine. He steps away from the armored machine, letting the candlelight dim around it. The workshop grows quieter. Then he gestures toward a set of wooden panels at the far end of the room. Come, he says. Let me show you why the body itself was my greatest invention. You follow slowly. He is heading toward the anatomy sketches. Leonardo stops in front of a tall cabinet, far narrower than the one that held the mechanical knight, but somehow more intimidating. He rests his hand on the wooden door, hesitates for a breath, and then opens it slowly. Instead of gears or armor, the interior holds neatly rolled folios tied with strips of linen, each labeled in his mirror handwriting. He lifts one out, sets it gently on a nearby table, and looks at you with an expression you haven't seen on him yet. Reverence. These, he says softly, are my studies of the body. He unrolls the parchment, and your eyes widen. The drawing that emerges is not just detailed, it's surgical, precise, intimate. A man's torso, flayed open, muscles layered like ribbons, ribs drawn with the tenderness of an artist painting a beloved landscape. Beneath it, Leonardo has labeled each structure, each tendon, each ribhead, each fiber, all in tidy reverse script, as if keeping the knowledge coded would somehow soften its weight. You whisper, "This is incredible." Leonardo nods, but doesn't smile. Only nature is incredible. I merely copy her. A mainstream historical fact surfaces immediately. Leonardo conducted dozens, possibly hundreds of dissections, often in secrecy, because the church and social norms frowned heavily on such studies. His anatomical sketches weren't just accurate, they were centuries ahead of their time. Muscles, bones, circulation, even the chambers of the heart. He saw the body as a machine and a miracle at the same time. He flips to another drawing. This one is a fetus, curled inside a womb. The lines are softer here, gentler, shaded with almost unbearable care. The anatomical accuracy is stunning for the 15th century, and beside it, he's written philosophical notes about life, growth, and what it means to be human. Leonardo touches the edge of the parchment. Inside is the secret of all motion, he murmurs. The shape of every gesture a man will ever make. You don't speak. You don't want to break the spell. He moves on to the next sketch, a cross-section of a skull. It shows the cranial cavity, the sinuses, the jaw hinge. But your eyes lock on. Something else. A tiny set of concentric circles drawn where he believed the senso comune, the seat of the soul, resided. A quirky tidbit. In several sketches, Leonardo tried to locate the exact spot in the brain where thought originated. His theories weren't perfect, but the ambition was astonishing. You point at the circles. Is that the soul? Leonardo arches one eyebrow. I have never seen one. But if it exists, it must sit somewhere. You grin. Probably not in the kneecap. He gives you a subtle glare. Do not mock the kneecap. It is more clever than you think. Joke number 1 achieved. He unrolls more sheets. Arms, legs, the spine, muscles drawn like meticulously braided ropes, tendons pulled taut in different positions. He's drawn hands, so many hands opened, clenched, flexed, clasped. The hands alone would make half the artists on the planet cry. Leonardo lifts one of the drawings, holding it up to candlelight. The body is a machine, he says, but also a garden. Bones are the framework, muscles are the vines, nerves are the wires of heaven. You tilt your head. Poetic. He shrugs. Truth is always poetic. Then he sets a fresh folio in front of you. It shows the human heart, 4 chambers, valves sketched in careful detail. He's drawn tiny arrows to show the direction of blood flow. You lean in, stunned. Another mainstream fact. Leonardo discovered, through dissections, that the heart's aortic valve worked through vortex patterns. Something physicians didn't confirm scientifically until the 20th century. He wasn't just observing anatomy, he was decoding physics. You whisper, "Did anyone believe you?" Leonardo huffs a laugh. "No, but belief is unimportant. Only observation matters." He gestures to another set of drawings, this time focusing on the shoulder joint. He's illustrated the deltoid muscle from 5 angles, showing how fibers fan across the scapula. He's drawn mechanical. Analogies beside it, a rope lifting a pulley, a lever pushing down like he couldn't resist merging anatomy with engineering. This leads you directly into the open scholarly debate. Historians still argue why Leonardo never published his anatomical work. Some say he planned to, but died before organizing it. Others think he feared backlash from religious authorities, and some insist he was simply too busy chasing 1,000 new ideas. Whatever the reason, his notes remain scattered and mostly unseen for centuries. You study the drawings again and feel a strange sensation, like you're in the presence of something sacred. Not because it's forbidden, but because it's true. Leonardo rolls up the folios with careful movements. "When I study the body," he says, "I feel I am reading the thoughts of God." You blink. That's the most intense bedtime quote I've ever heard. He gives a tiny smirk. He tucks the folios back into the cabinet, tying each one as gently as if it were a living thing. Then he closes the door, but he doesn't walk away. Not yet. Instead, he motions you toward another table, this one stacked with lenses, prisms, and strange little devices that look like props from a magic show. "The body moves," he says, "but the eyes decide what is real." You swallow. You're heading into Leonardo's experiments with light, vision, and the nature of seeing itself. Leonardo guides you toward a long, narrow table near the window, one cluttered, not with gears or sketches of flayed muscles, but with glass. Lenses of every size rest in small wooden frames. Some are round, others oval. A few look like they were stolen from the world's earliest telescope, and one shaped like a perfect teardrop rolls dangerously close to the edge until Leonardo catches it mid-fall with reflexes that feel slightly insulting. He sets the teardrop lens down and gestures for you to sit. You lower yourself onto a stool, half expecting him to pull out a deck of cards and do a magic trick. Instead, he lifts a polished glass sphere and holds it out at arm's length. "Look," he says quietly. You lean in. At first, you only see your own reflection distorted, stretched, your forehead suddenly enormous. But then, something astonishing happens. The sphere refracts the candlelight, sending tiny rainbows across the wooden table like scattered jewels. The lines of the workshop warp, bend, flicker. The world curves around the glass. Leonardo's voice lowers. "Light tells lies," he murmurs, "but it lies in the same way every time. That is how you learn its truth." You stare at the sphere again, mesmerized. A mainstream historical fact flickers into your thoughts. Leonardo was one of the first people to study optics systematically. He sketched how light reflects, refracts, and enters the eye. He analyzed perspective with mathematical rigor. He experimented with lenses, prisms, mirrors, and even pinhole projection long before photography existed. He picks up a thin, polished lens, the shape of an early magnifying glass, and places it over a sketch of a feather. The lines swell, softening at the edges. You watch the quill widen like an unfolding fan. Leonardo smiles faintly. "The world grows when seen through the right glass," he whispers. Then he hands you a rectangular piece of polished crystal. Hold it there, he instructs, pointing toward the candle. You raise it, and a thin column of white light shoots onto the table, a clean, bright streak. You gasp softly. Leonardo beams. Light can be drawn with glass, he says. A perfect line, no brush required. You grin. So, the first optical highlighter? He blinks. The what? Never mind. He returns to the table and lifts a double convex lens. Look again, he says. He places the lens between you and the window. The moonlit street outside warps into a fisheye reflection, buildings curved, sky stretched. The fine sevens dot, cobblestones bending like ripples on water. Your breath catches. It's like the world is inside the glass. Leonardo nods. The pupil works the same way, a lens with a door. He points to a diagram pinned nearby, an eye cut neatly in half, showing the cornea, pupil, crystalline lens, and optic nerve. His accuracy is startling. He even sketched the way light rays bend as they pass through different media. And though some parts aren't perfectly correct by modern medical standards, his reasoning is astonishingly close. Then you notice something strange on another sheet. A prism splitting light into colors. Reds, blues, yellows. You point. You figured this out? Leonardo waves a hand modestly. The prism shows what the world hides. All colors live inside white. You sit back. That statement, delivered like a casual observation, is the kind of thing high school physics teachers spend entire chapters explaining. Then comes the quirky tidbit. On the edge of one optical sketch, Leonardo doodled a pair of eyes looking sideways at each other suspiciously. Underneath, in tiny mirror writing, he wrote something equivalent to, "Why do two eyes see one thing? Even geniuses have existential optics crises." He moves closer to a polished bronze mirror hanging from a hook. It's slightly warped, reflecting your face as if you're halfway into a dream. Leonardo adjusts the angle so the candlelight reflects onto the ceiling, creating a shimmering oval of light above you. Even lies, he says, can illuminate. You raise an eyebrow. Another poetic observation? He shrugs. If the world is watching, I cannot help it. He reaches behind the mirror and retrieves something unexpected, a small wooden box with a tiny hole on one side and a translucent parchment panel on the other. You blink. It looks familiar. He sets it on the table, places a candle behind the hole, and adjusts the angle. Suddenly, an inverted silhouette appears faintly on the parchment screen. You freeze. Is this a camera obscura? Leonardo nods without ceremony. A chamber for light, he explains. It paints the world upside down. A mainstream historical fact. Leonardo da Vinci was one of the earliest documented people to describe the camera obscura with scientific precision. His notes on how images project through small openings shaped the foundation of photography centuries later. He traces the silhouette with a soft brush. This, he says, is how the eye truly works. The world enters as shadow and light. The mind must turn it upright. He turns to you, expression sharp. Nothing you see is as simple as you believe. A whisper of an open scholarly debate surfaces. Historians still argue how far Leonardo pushed his optical experiments. Did he use the camera obscura to plan paintings? Did he experiment with projecting color? Some say he might have tried layering translucent pigments to mimic refracted light. Others argue he used it mainly as a drawing aid. The truth remains shimmering like light itself. Leonardo picks up the teardrop lens again, as tenderly as someone holding a baby bird. He lifts it toward your face and watches the distortion dance across your features. Sight, he murmurs, is how the universe introduces itself, but it always keeps some secrets. You open your mouth to respond something clever, something lightly sarcastic, but before you can speak, he sets the lens down gently and says, "Come." The river waits. He gestures toward a stack of blue-toned sketches, diagrams of locks, pumps, mills, and entire canal networks. "We have shaped the air, the body, and the light," he says. "Now we shape the water." Leonardo moves with unusual urgency now, as if the river he just mentioned is rising behind him, and only you can see the waterline creeping higher. He sweeps aside, a mound of brushes and wooden rulers, revealing a long strip of parchment drawn almost entirely in deep blue pigment, soaked, saturated, rippling under the candlelight like a frozen wave. The drawings on it are unmistakable. Machines, gates, dams, and winding canals shaped with obsessive precision. You realize you're staring at the hydraulic heart of Renaissance engineering, Leonardo's water machines. He taps the largest diagram first, a canal system with multiple levels connected by a series of cleverly angled gates. They look almost modern, like the locks used in today's shipping routes, except these were sketched centuries before such systems became common. These, Leonardo says, pointing at the angled grooves, lift boats without the men suffering. He pauses. Well, suffering less. You tilt your head. So it's basically ancient water elevators? He smiles. Elevators for boats. Yes. Congratulations, that's your first joke for this section, disguised as modern logic. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Leonardo designed some of the earliest modern lock systems, improving both safety and efficiency. His innovations influenced water management across Milan, where he supervised canals, dredges, and flood controls. He wasn't just doodling machines, he was reshaping landscapes. Leonardo spreads another sheet, this one showing a massive water wheel attached to gears. The wheel is drawn with elegant curvature, every spoke angled just so. The water turns this, he says, and this, he taps an interconnected gear, turns the millstones. He sits back, satisfied. It is the river grinding the grain, not the men. You nod, impressed. So, early hydropower. He frowns. Hydropower? He repeats, tasting the phrase like unfamiliar. Fruit. Yes, I like it. The word feels like a river in the mouth. You make a mental note to tell your high school science teacher that Leonardo da Vinci approved of the term. He lifts yet another parchment, revealing a bizarre machine that looks like a wooden centipede designed for chaos. A canal dredger, Leonardo explains. It scoops the mud from the bottom so the water stays deep. The mechanism includes a rotating belt, a series of wooden scoops, and a dumping chute. You stare. So, a Renaissance Roomba, but for rivers. Leonardo pauses. A what? Never mind. He narrows his eyes suspiciously. One day you must explain these strange words. You give him a gentle pat on the arm. Not tonight, he harumphs. Then he moves to the next sketch. This one, showing a twisting device, with a long handle and a spiraled blade inside a tube. You blink. That looks like a modern water pump, Leonardo beams. Water is lazy, he says. You must force it upward, like a stubborn goat. A quirky tidbit. Leonardo designed multiple styles of water pumps, including a double-acting piston pump, a vacuum pump, and a spiral pump. Many of his designs were centuries ahead of practical engineering, though some scholars argue his spiral pump was inspired by the ancient Archimedean screw. Others believe Leonardo reinvented the idea independently. Historians still argue, mostly politely, about whose influence was whose. You watch him rotate a small wooden model, a replica of his screw pump. When he turns the handle, the spiral inside drags imaginary water upward in smooth, rhythmic motions. This, he says, pulls the river where I want it. You grin. Sounds like you have personal beef with rivers. He raises one eyebrow. Rivers are like people. Useful, but unreliable. Fair. He then points at a sketch showing a long canal running between rows of orchards. Little arrows indicate irrigation channels. Tiny. Trees ridiculously cute, honestly dot the page. Water brings life, he says, but only if it is guided. Another mainstream historical point surfaces. Leonardo spent years studying how water erodes, flows, swirls, and carves landscapes. His water studies are considered some of the most advanced hydrodynamic analyses of his era. He wasn't just preventing floods, he was trying to understand water the way he understood air and anatomy, from the inside out. He lifts a final parchment, one filled with spirals, spirals of water, spirals of foam, tiny arrows, sketches of whirlpools, notes about turbulence scribbled everywhere. This is the famous page of his water vortex studies. You blink. You studied whirlpools. Leonardo nods enthusiastically. Water dances, he says, always in circles. It never moves straight unless forced. He traces one spiral with his fingertip. Everything in nature curves. Even lightning bends. The candlelight flickers across the grow, spirals, giving them the illusion of motion, as if the water is still turning after 5 centuries. Here comes the open scholarly debate. Historians still discuss whether Leonardo's water studies were intended purely for engineering, or whether he hoped to decode universal patterns of motion. Some argue he was seeking mathematical laws behind nature. Others believe he was inspired by artistic fascination. A few suggest he viewed water as a metaphor for the human soul, restless, unpredictable, always searching for balance. You gently tap a miniature bridge model resting on the table. It arches elegantly over a narrow wooden trough, a canal mock-up. You built these just to test flow? Leonardo nods. A bridge must respect the water beneath it, he says. If the water is angry, the bridge will die. You stare at him. That is the most Italian-sounding engineering advice I've ever heard. He ignores the jab and flips one more model upright, a water-powered sawmill, its long blade connected to a crankshaft. The river cuts the wood, he says proudly, while the men drink wine. You laugh. So your inventions were also labor-saving devices? He waves a hand dramatically. Men must spend more time thinking, less time sweating. You open your mouth to point out that most Renaissance men disagreed violently with this philosophy, but Leonardo is already moving on, brushing the blue pigment off his hands. He pauses, looks at you. The river moves with sound, he says softly. But there is another machine that moves with sound as well, a machine that sings. You tilt your head, confused. He smiles, the kind of smile that promises delightful chaos. It is time you heard my musical inventions. You follow him, heartbeat light as the sketches of water swirl behind you. Leonardo leads you toward a narrower workbench near the back of the studio, a place you hadn't noticed before because it was hidden behind stacks of gears, folded canvases, and what appears to be a half-eaten loaf of bread. But when he clears the clutter away, you feel a shift in the room, a softness, a hush, as if the workshop itself is holding its breath. Laid out on the table are instruments, but not instruments you recognize. These aren't lutes or harps or flutes. These are hybrids, elegant Frankensteins of wood and brass, strings paired with air chambers, reeds fused with metal plates, curved bodies shaped into spirals that look more like sculptures than anything meant to make noise. You build weapons, you whisper. Flying machines, robots, cities, and instruments? Leonardo raises an eyebrow. Music is mathematics that has learned to dance. Okay, that's your first joke reaction. You mutter under your breath, I'll put that on a mug. He gives you a very confused look. He gestures to the first creation, a long wooden tube wrapped around a rectangular sound box. Inside, delicate gears and slats overlap one another. This, he says, is the viola organista. You blink. The what? He taps the top. A keyboard that bows strings, not plucks, bows. A mainstream historical fact lands softly. The viola organista was real. Leonardo designed a keyboard instrument that used rotating wheels of horsehair to rub the strings like dozens of tiny violin bows controlled by keys. The result? A sound that blended harpsichord clarity with cello warmth. Centuries later, a modern musician actually built it, and it worked. Leonardo places his fingers on the wooden keys and presses gently. Beneath the lid, a quiet hum rises, a trembling whisper like the first breath of a cello waking up. The gears spin, the horsehair wheel rotates, and a long, rich note spills into the workshop. You feel it before you hear it, vibrating through the wooden table, warming your ribs, reaching the rafters. Leonardo closes his eyes. A single gesture, he says softly, and the machine sings. You stare, stunned. That sounds unreal. He opens one eye. It sounds like a string played by a ghost. You grin. Joke number 2 slides in easily. Very comforting, thanks. He moves to another invention, a box-shaped device with dozens of long pipes rising from its top like an overgrown metal porcupine. This, he says, mixes air and vibration. A wind instrument that uses keys to change the shape of breath. You tilt your head. So, an accordion ancestor? Leonardo pauses. An accord. What? Never mind. He gently pumps a hidden lever at the base. Air flows through the pipes, and a strange harmonic cluster rises like a choir singing through metallic throats. The sound is haunting, textured, almost sacred. He watches your reaction with quiet amusement. Music, he says, is a form of geometry that enters through the ear. You lean closer to another object on the table, a round instrument with strings stretched across its bluesic face and a crank attached to the side. You reach out instinctively. Leonardo catches your wrist lightly. "Be careful," he warns. "This one bites." You stare in horror. He snorts. "I joke, mostly. It takes patience," he demonstrates, turning the crank slowly. A wheel beneath the strings begins rotating, bowing them continuously, a mechanism strikingly similar to a modern hurdy-gurdy, though centuries older. The tones waver, deep and resonant, like a violin learning to speak underwater. A quirky tidbit flashes through your mind. Leonardo sketched early versions of crank instruments that could sustain notes infinitely. Some scholars believe he experimented with continuo devices long before organ builders perfected them. Then he pulls you to the far corner, where one more machine waits, a bizarre combination of bellows, tubes, and a curved wooden spine. "This one," he says, changes shape as it plays. Like the lungs. He presses a lever. The spine flexes. Air rushes through an inner chamber, producing a sound that is strangely vocal. Not human, but not entirely mechanical either. You raise an eyebrow. "You built a singing creature?" He shrugs. "If nature sings, why should machines not also try?" You stare at him, trying to absorb the sheer audacity of that idea. Machines that sing, machines that breathe, machines that play notes meant for human lungs and human hands. He steps back, letting the sounds fade. The last resonances cling to the rafters like cobwebs of music. Then he rests his palms on the table and says, "These are the inventions I build when the world becomes too loud. War has machines, but so does peace." You nod. The weight of that hits softly. Then comes the scholarly debate. Historians still argue why Leonardo never built most of his musical inventions. Some say lack of funding. Others blame uncooperative workshops. Some believe he created them purely for intellectual pleasure, needing no audience or patron. Few scholars even speculate. He hesitated, because the sound they would make was too unpredictable, too strange for Renaissance ears. You run a hand along the viola organista. "Why music?" you ask. Leonardo considers you. "Because," he says slowly, "sound is the only motion the heart understands without explanation." You sit with that for a moment, then he straightens. "But men do not always ask for sound," he says, voice tightening. "Sometimes they ask for silence, for destruction, for fire drawn with geometry." He turns toward another cluster of sketches, these far darker, filled with pointed shapes, angled blades, and devices clearly meant for war. War machines. Machines he didn't want to build, but built anyway. You follow him as he steps into the shadowed side of the workshop, where ambition and reluctance blur together and invention is at its most dangerous. Leonardo pauses at the threshold before stepping into the darker corner of the workshop, almost as if he's weighing whether to let you follow him into this part of his mind. The candlelight behind you flickers gently, but up ahead the shadows stretch longer, pooling around tables stacked with designs you instinctively know he never bragged about. Weapons, blades, engines of destruction sketched with the same precision as his flying machines, but without the same joy. "These," he says quietly, "are the inventions men asked of me." You can hear the difference in his voice. Not reluctance exactly, but a kind of moral fatigue, like each drawing came at the cost of something inside him. He lifts the first parchment. The lines are sharp, angular, a siege machine shaped like a monstrous wheel with spiked blades along its rim. "This one," he says, "was for cutting through enemy formations." You lean in. "That looks horrifying." Leonardo nods, expression tight. "It is." His tone makes it clear that this is not a compliment. A mainstream historical fact settles in your mind. Leonardo often worked for warlords and dukes who demanded military innovations. He survived by offering ideas but sometimes obscured them, or complicated them, or hid details so they could not easily be built. His notebooks blend brilliance with caution. He slides that parchment aside and reveals another. A bridge, lightweight, collapsible, designed to be carried by soldiers and deployed in seconds. "This one," he says, "was useful. It spares lives." He taps the drawing. Quick retreat, quick pursuit, quick escape. You study the design. It's shockingly modern, like a portable military bridge used today. That's actually clever, you say softly. Leonardo exhales. Not every war machine must kill. Then, with visible reluctance, he moves on to a third drawing. A multi-barreled cannon, 4, 6, 8 small barrels, arranged in a fan-like arc. This fires many shots quickly, he murmurs, so that reload time is lessened. You feel your stomach drop. So, an early machine gun? He shakes his head firmly. No, not a gun that fires quickly, but one that can be fired in succession. His phrasing matters to him. Machines should help, not slaughter. A quirky tidbit catches your eye. At the bottom corner of the cannon sketch, Leonardo drew a tiny man running away with exaggerated motion lines and a panicked expression. Beneath him, a short note. Do not stand here. The Renaissance equivalent of a safety warning label. You stifle a laugh. Leonardo notices. I added that for the Duke's guards, he admits. They never listen. You smile. Joke number 1, secured. But he's already turning away from the cannons. His movements grow sharper, more restless. Men always want the wrong inventions, he mutters. He reaches for a larger model covered by a cloth. He hesitates. Just a moment. Then he lifts it. Beneath is a rotating platform with rows of small cannons arranged around its perimeter. It looks like a flower made of gun barrels. Elegant, lethal, pointless. This, he says, was my least favorite. You take a step back. Why? He meets your eyes. Because it works too well. There's a heaviness there like the weight of futures he wanted to prevent. War is one thing. Innovation is another. But combining them, that's something he never fully made peace with. Then he shows you something stranger. A sketch of an early flamethrower concept bellows attached to a tube releasing pressurized flame. You stare in horror. Did you actually design this? Leonardo sighs. I was asked to. I made it complicated so they could not use it. A subtle act of rebellion hidden in ink and gears. Here comes the open scholarly debate. Historians still argue how much of Leonardo's military work he sabotaged intentionally. Some point to impossible gear ratios. Others cite missing components or contradictory instructions. A few insist these mistakes were deliberate moral safeguards. Others say they were simply incomplete drafts. The truth remains tangled in mirror writing and motive. Leonardo returns the flamethrower sketch to its pile like it burns his hands. Enough, he whispers. I do not wish to stay here. He turns away, shoulders slightly hunched, as if shedding the weight of steel and fire. Then, with surprising gentleness, he picks up a fresh sheet of parchment. Not a weapon this time, but a page filled with elegant backwards lines of text. Come, he says softly. Let me show you how I hide my thoughts. You blink. Hide them? He nods, expression mysterious. Not every invention is meant for every eye. He gestures toward a table lit by a single candle, where dozens of notebooks lie open filled with mirror writing, coded diagrams, symbols, and fragments of ideas scattered like constellations across the page. The weapons fade behind you. The secrets lie ahead. Leonardo walks toward the quieter end of the workshop, where the shadows soften and the clutter gives way to something more deliberate. Rows of notebooks, bound in worn leather, stacked with careful precision. Compared to the chaotic sketches and half-built contraptions scattered throughout the studio, this corner feels almost sacred, a place for thoughts, secrets, and ideas too dangerous or too precious to be understood by just anyone. He lays a hand on one of the codices, fingers brushing the cracked spine. This, he murmurs, is where I speak to myself. You lean closer. The notebook is filled edge to edge with writing dense, slanted, written from right to left. At first glance, it looks like an ancient script, something mystical or encrypted. But then, your brain flips it. Mirror writing. Leonardo's trademark. He sees your expression and smirks. Yes, he says. Backwards. You run your fingertip along a paragraph. The letters flow beautifully careful. Curves, loops, and slender strokes. Why, you ask? Why write this way? Leonardo shrugs lightly. It keeps the careless from reading too quickly, and it keeps my hand from smudging the ink. He holds up a stained fingertip. Mostly. A mainstream historical fact rises immediately. Leonardo didn't write backwards out of superstition or secrecy alone. He was left-handed, and mirror writing kept the wet ink from smearing. But scholars also believe it served as a subtle barrier between him and nosy assistants, courtiers, rivals, or religious authorities. He opens to a page filled not just with writing, but diagrams, small gears, pulleys, triangles, anatomical notes, a doodle of a bird mid-flight, and something that looks suspiciously like a giant spoon. You raise an eyebrow at him. "What's the spoon for?" Leonardo pretends not to hear you. Then, with theatrical precision, he returns to a page at the beginning of the notebook. A large, flowing sentence stretches across the top. With the candle at your shoulder, you slowly read the reverse text, your brain working harder than it wants to. It says something equivalent to, "Begin by studying the simplest things. They teach the most." You smile. That's surprisingly zen. Leonardo lifts a brow. "Everything is simple once you look long enough." You whisper back, "Except your handwriting." He glares at you, but the corner of his mouth twitches. Joke number 1. Achieved. He flips to another spread, this one entirely filled with coded symbols. Circles, triangles, lines intersecting at odd angles. You tilt your head. What is this? Geometry? A map? A puzzle? Leonardo shrugs. A thought. He taps a triangle. This was the shape of a water current. He taps a spiral. This, a study of hair curling in the wind. He taps a cluster of lines. And this, he hesitates. A machine I did not finish. You lean in, trying to decipher it. The drawing looks like a wooden structure with rotating plates, but it's incomplete. No annotations, no arrows, just a seed of an idea left to sleep forever. That leads directly into the quirky tidbit. Leonardo treated his notebooks like gardens, seeds scattered freely, but only some ever grew. Many pages contain abandoned sketches, half-formed thoughts, or diagrams whose purpose is still unknown today. Scholars have entire careers built on deciphering these abandoned ideas. He flips again, revealing a list of inventions written in mirror script. Water measuring device, collapsible ladder, self-heating spit, improved mortar for building, device to walk on water, yes, adjustable wrench, machine for perpetual turning. You squint. Wait, walking on water. Leonardo snorts. It worked poorly. You grin. So, didn't work. He sighs. Correct. I sank quickly. He flips to one of the most famous sheets, the page showing his coded service letter to Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan. The letter lists a staggering array of weapons, machines, defensive measures, and architectural skills. But near the bottom, in subtle, humble script, Leonardo wrote, "And I can also paint." Leonardo taps that line and gives you a dry look. They never read that part. You choke out a laugh. Yes. How could they possibly notice the man who painted the Mona Lisa mentioning he paints? He waves a hand dismissively. Everyone wants machines. No one wants patience. Then he points to the margins. Along the edges of the page, you spot tiny reverse sketches of bombs, bridges, and spinning blades. And then, just when you think the page can't surprise you more, you find a little figure tucked in the corner. A duck. Just a duck. Standing there, doing nothing. Leonardo sees your confusion and shrugs. I like ducks. You nod. Reasonable. He flips to a darker page, a page where the ink looks heavier, almost anxious. Notes about flight, lift, drag. A line written twice, as if he doubted it. Nature is full of infinite causes that have never yet occurred in experience. You exhale softly. It's a reminder of how he saw the world not as a place defined by what happens, but what could happen. Open scholarly debate slips into your thoughts. Historians still argue whether Leonardo's mirror writing was for privacy, habit, efficiency, or self-protection. Some believe he encoded ideas to prevent misuse. Others say he wanted to organize thoughts in ways only he could understand. A few propose it was simply the way his mind flowed most comfortably. Leonardo closes the notebook gently, as if sealing a secret. Then he steps back, motioning toward shelves stacked with even more codices. Codex Atlanticus, Codex Arundel, Codex Forster, lost codices scattered across centuries. These, he says, are parts of me, scattered now, traveling the world without my permission. You sense a subtle ache in him. His thoughts traveled further than he ever could, but in fragments, torn pages, misplaced notes, ideas that would be pieced together long after his lifetime. He lifts another notebook. Its pages are blank. For new ideas, he explains. You smile. What will go in this one? He blinks slowly. I do not know. They have not arrived yet. Then he turns toward a set of cabinets filled with rolled papers, loose scraps, broken sketches, and diagrams that seem older than the rest. These, he says softly, are the inventions that never made it even into my notebooks, the ones I began, abandoned, or lost. He motions for you to follow. You are about to witness the inventions Leonardo conceived and then let vanish. Leonardo leads you to a tall, dust-coated cabinet in the far corner of the studio, the one you hadn't dared open earlier because it radiates the exact energy of things that fell out of genius and into chaos. The hinges creak as he swings the door open, and the smell of old parchment and cedar rushes out, carrying with it centuries of abandoned brilliance. Inside are rolls of sketches tied with unraveling string, scraps of paper shoved between wooden slats, broken prototypes, and objects so strangely shaped you'd need a whole new vocabulary just to describe them. This is not the tidy world of anatomical drawings or elegant optical studies. This is the wilderness of Leonardo's mind, the inventions that slipped away. He pulls out a battered scroll, its edges browned by time, and spreads it on a cluttered table. The drawing inside is bizarre. A man stands on a platform wearing something like wings? No, not wings. More like spring-loaded paddles attached to his arms and legs. You squint. Is this for walking on water? Leonardo gives you a look halfway between pride and embarrassment. It was a hypothesis, he says. One does not know until one tries. You lean closer. The device consists of two flat, elongated panels strapped to the fiver, feet like a cross between snowshoes and panic. The paddles on the arms flap when the wearer moves. The idea looks like the Renaissance version of a cartoon escape plan. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Leonardo really did sketch devices for human flotation and water ambulation, including pontoon-like shoes meant to support weight across the water's surface. There's no evidence they worked. There is evidence he tested at least one design and sank immediately. A small doodle on the page confirms it. Leonardo drew a stick figure falling sideways into water with a note underneath. Heavy shoes. Adjust buoyancy. You grin. So it didn't work, he mutters. It worked briefly. You raise an eyebrow. Like, half a second? He clears his throat. Yes. Joke, number 1 of the section. Achieved. He rolls up the scroll with a little more force than necessary and reaches for another. This one reveals a swirling sketch of a machine with curved blades, mounted inside a cylindrical chamber. You squint. What is this? Leonardo's smile turns secretive. A machine for perpetual turning. You blink. Like, perpetual motion? He nods. A machine that spins forever, as long as the world turns. You take a slow breath. Did it work? His expression sinks. No. The drawing is undeniably beautiful, though spirals overlapping spirals, weights shifting positions as the wheel rotates. It looks like a mandala designed by a physicist. Of course, perpetual motion is impossible, but the fact he tried says everything about his relentless curiosity. Historians still argue whether Leonardo believed perpetual motion was truly achievable or whether he studied it simply to disprove others. Many of his notes suggest he ultimately concluded it was impossible. Others hint he never fully surrendered the idea. He pushes that drawing aside too, as if its failure still annoys him. He lifts a small wooden model next something, with rotating blades and a hollow center. It looks vaguely like a water pump or a medieval blender. This machine, he says, was meant to mix liquids without spilling them. You tilt your head. For cooking, he sighs deeply. For pigments. Right. Renaissance problems. But the model has an odd feature. A tiny hinged lid shaped like a hat. You tap it. Is that a little lid? Leonardo shrugs. It kept dust out, and looks like a hat. He pretends not to hear you. Then he reaches higher into the cabinet and retrieves something wrapped in cloth. When he removes the covering, you're greeted with wheels, but strange wheels. Each one has steps carved into the rim, like tiny staircases circling the circumference. What is this? You ask. A climbing device, he explains. For vertical walls. You blink. You made a wheel, with stairs. Yes. To climb walls? Yes. Like a hamster. Leonardo frowns. What is a hamster? Never mind. He demonstrates how the device was meant to work. The stepped wheels grip uneven stone surfaces, allowing a person to push it upward gradually. But as you can guess, there's a note scribbled beside the sketch. Too heavy, too slow, too foolish. A quirky tidbit. Leonardo often wrote insults to himself in the margins of failed designs. He returns the climbing wheel to the cabinet and pulls out yet another invention, a strange mask-like contraption with copper tubes and a wooden frame. You freeze. Is that another diving mask? He tilts it. No. This one was for breathing foul air. You stare. Like a gas mask? He nods. A mainstream historical fact hits you. Leonardo sketched an early filtration mask using damp cloth to block harmful particles designed for workers in dangerous environments or soldiers exposed to toxic fumes. The concept predated practical gas masks by centuries. He hands it to you. The copper tubing feels warm in your hands. It works poorly, he admits, but the idea is sound. You gently set it down, then he pulls out a final scroll, the largest one yet, tied with a dark ribbon. He unwraps it with care. The parchment unfurls across half the table. Your breath catches. It's a city plan, but not the neat, elegant one he showed you earlier. This one is chaotic, layered, spiraling outward in bizarre geometric patterns. Streets intersect at impossible angles. Buildings cluster tightly, then explode outward. It looks alien. What is this? You whisper. Leonardo hesitates. An experiment, he says softly. A city shaped like a thought, not like a place. You stare. What does that mean? It means, he says, that some ideas are not for the world, only for the mind. You trace the spirals with your finger. Some resemble seashells, others fractals, others pure abstraction. It's a map of imagination, one that never escaped the page. Then comes the open, scholarly debate. Many Leonardo sketches defy explanation. Scholars still fight over whether some diagrams are mechanical, artistic, symbolic, or simply doodles for his own amusement. Some codex pages show diagrams no one has decoded, even today. Were they inventions, meditations, notes for paintings, mathematical experiments, or thoughts too unusual to categorize? Leonardo gently rolls up the page. Not everything must be finished, he says quietly. Sometimes the beginning is enough. He places the scroll back inside the cabinet and closes the doors with a sigh that feels like closing old memories. Then he turns to you. There is one more thing you must see, he says softly. Not something I hid, but something the world lost. You swallow. The notebooks, he says. That disappeared. He gestures toward another table, this one covered in torn pages, mismatched folios, and fragments carried across centuries. You step forward. You're heading into the mystery of Leonardo's lost codices. Leonardo leads you toward a low, wide table near the back wall, one that looks less like a workspace and more like an archaeological dig site. Torn papers, mismatched bindings, loose folios, half-burned scraps, and pages covered in frantic mirror writing are scattered everywhere, like the aftermath of some intellectual storm. You feel the weight shift in the room. This isn't the corner of invention. It's the corner of loss. These, Leonardo says quietly, are the pieces that should never have been separated. You kneel beside the table. Some pages are intact. Others look like they were ripped out of notebooks centuries ago, missing corners or marred with water stains. A few are pierced with holes worm damage. And on one, the ink has bled so badly it resembles a blurred dream. These are your missing codices? You whisper. Leonardo nods. Some were stolen, others sold, and many simply wandered. A mainstream historical fact rises in your mind. Leonardo's notebooks were scattered after his death, divided among students, collectors, aristocrats, and people who didn't even realize their value. Many pages resurfaced centuries later in dusty libraries. Others vanished entirely. Scholars estimate we've found less than half of what he wrote. He picks up a fragment gently, like lifting a wounded bird. The top corner is missing. The drawing shows a machine, something with spiraled gears and a turning shaft, but only half the diagram remains. "I never finished this," he murmurs. "Perhaps I would have, but the page left me before I left it." You blink. There's something heartbreaking about that phrasing. "Who took it?" you ask softly. Leonardo shrugs. "Ideas travel, men travel faster." He moves aside a small pile of papers, revealing a fragment with bold, energetic strokes. It's clearly part of a larger invention, but only a quarter of it remains. You see what looks like the end of a screw pump, the lower corner of a gear, and a bit of mirror writing cut off mid-sentence. You try to decipher it. Turns as the water. That's it. The rest is gone. Leonardo watches you. "Sometimes the river steals even the current," he says. "You're not sure what that means, but it hurts anyway." He shows you another fragment, this one, a section of text describing an experiment with heat and air pressure. The writing stops abruptly, as if someone tore the page in half long before you arrived. "This page," Leonardo says, "was part of a larger essay, or perhaps the beginning of one." You exhale. "Do you remember what you wrote?" He smiles sadly. "I have forgotten many thoughts I once held tightly." You pick up a small scrap lying near your knee. It shows a tiny sketch of a wing, just a wing, nothing else. No notes, no diagram, no annotations. Nothing indicating whether it belonged to a flying machine, an anatomical study, or simply a passing inspiration. A quirky tidbit. Among Leonardo's discovered fragments, scholars found tiny sketches, eyes, birds, gears, even a random shoe ideas, too small to categorize, possibly doodles, possibly seeds of larger designs. Some fragments appear in multiple collections, separated by entire continents. Leonardo notices your confusion and gestures to the table. "These pieces," he says, "are like footsteps. They tell you where I walked, but not where I was going." You lean over the table, scanning scattered phrases. "If the heat continues, the air, the pressure must escape, else it." Movement is nothing but. Each sentence is a cliffhanger, each fragment a half-breathed idea. He picks up another folio, this one folded and worn. When opened, it reveals a diagram showing a cross-section of a building with strange angled supports. It looks like the beginning of an architectural innovation. But the entire top half of the page is missing. You ask, "What building was this for?" Leonardo taps the drawing. "A church, or a palace, or perhaps," he pauses, tilting his head, "perhaps only an exercise." You blink. "You don't remember?" He shakes his head. "Ideas do not belong to memory. They belong to the moment." Then he lifts a packet of pages tied with twine. "These were found by a merchant," he explains. "He used them to wrap spices." You stare in horror. "He what?" Leonardo shrugs. "The world values what it understands. Sometimes it understands nothing." You place a hand on the scattered pages. They feel brittle, fragile, precious. Open scholarly debate rises. Historians still argue about the lost codices. How many pages existed originally? How many remain missing? And whether crucial inventions or discoveries lie buried in private collections or forgotten archives. Rumors persist of unseen manuscripts in vaults, attics, and monasteries. Some believe entire volumes, 5 or more, are lost forever. Leonardo lifts a small wooden box from beneath the table. Inside is a pile of parchment scraps cut into irregular shapes. A gear tooth, a feather, a sketch of a man holding something long forgotten. These are ideas that never made it to fullness, abandoned, interrupted, or cannibalized for new projects. He looks at you gently. "Do you see now?" he asks. "Genius is not in the devices or machines. It is in the fragments." You nod slowly. "Because they show the mind at work." Leonardo touches one broken page, tracing the faint, reversed lettering. "Because they show the journey," he corrects softly. "And the journey is the only part that matters." He sets the fragments down, letting them rest in the candlelight. Then he turns to a nearby shelf, one filled not with torn pages, but whole notebooks. Codex Leicester, Codex Madrid, Codex Arundel, collections you recognize from museum reunions centuries after his death. These, he says, return to the world. But many still wander. His face softens. But perhaps that is fitting. Ideas should wander. He closes the cabinet doors gently. Then he straightens, half smiling. Come, he says. There is something else you must understand. He gestures toward a long bench covered in manuscripts from later centuries, treatises, marginalia, letters, drawings made by scholars who rediscovered his work. Watch, he says quietly, how the world misunderstood me, and worshipped me, and reinvented me. You swallow. You're stepping into Leonardo's accidental legacy. Leonardo steps aside from the scattered fragments and motions you toward another long table. This one strangely tidy compared to the rest of the workshop. Neat stacks of pages, bound books arranged in careful rows, letters copied by hand, notes written in unfamiliar styles. These pages don't belong to Leonardo, yet everything here exists because of him. This, he says gently, is what came after me. You step closer. Candlelight washes across the papers, revealing dates centuries after Leonardo's death. Scholars' handwriting, curators' annotations, artists' sketches inspired by his own. You're no longer looking at Leonardo's inventions, you're looking at the world's attempts to interpret him. This is your legacy? You whisper. He lifts a brow. My misunderstanding, he corrects. A strange stillness fills the workshop. He picks up a thin booklet from the table. Its pages are filled with careful scripts from the 17th century, each line discussing his flying machines in tones of awe and confusion. One scholar praises Leonardo's brilliance. Another accuses him of madness. A third tries and fails to reconstruct one of his gliders using the wrong diagram entirely. Leonardo smirks. They always build the wrong wing first. You grin. At least they tried. He hums thoughtfully. Trying is the easiest part. Understanding is the hardest. You flip a page. Sketches show men testing contraptions vaguely inspired by Leonardo wingsuits strapped to their arms, some dangerously shaped like bat wings, others like elaborate sails. One annotation, scrawled in Latin, reads something like, "The master surely intended this design, although the proportions confuse me." You glance at Leonardo. Did you intend that? He squints. Absolutely not. Joke number one. Secured. He moves on to another book, a heavy, leather-bound volume from the 1800s. Inside are early photographs of rediscovered Leonardo manuscripts, grainy, images of mirror writing. Diagrams engineers struggled to decipher. Some pages labeled incomplete, others miraculous. You lean closer. That's the Codex Atlanticus, you whisper. Leonardo nods. Returned to the world long after I left it. He taps one picture, a sketch of a water machine. This page lived in a monastery for 200 years. A mainstream historical fact rises. Many of Leonardo's notebooks resurfaced only in the 19th century, scattered through private collections, aristocratic estates, and obscure libraries. Scholars spent decades trying to catalogue them. Many are still incomplete. Many are still missing. Leonardo opens another book, this one from the 20th century. Inside are photos of museum exhibitions, diagrams redrawn with modern annotations, and engineers posing next to full-scale reconstructions of his machines. He taps a photograph of the aerial screw, the proto-helicopter. In the picture, museum engineers are standing proudly beside a towering replica. You study Leonardo's expression. He sighs. They used the wrong canvas tension. You laugh softly. It's still beautiful. He shrugs. Beauty is easy. Flight is difficult. He flips to another page, this one showing his mechanical knight reconstructed in polished metal. The knight stands upright, cables hidden, posture stiff yet noble. The caption explains how robotics engineers proved that Leonardo's automaton was fully functional centuries before robotics had a name. Leonardo tilts his head, curious. Does it move? You nod. It does. A quiet, humbled wonder flickers across his face. He turns the page again. Now you see modern wind tunnel tests of his gliders, photos of aerodynamic studies, engineers analyzing wing curvature, notes explaining how some of his ideas were incredibly advanced, while others needed materials he didn't have. Then comes a quirky tidbit. One photograph shows a group of schoolchildren surrounded by cardboard, replicas of Leonardo's inventions, catapults, flying machines, water wheels, painted brightly and clearly, assembled with love and zero structural integrity. Leonardo stares. Those wings would collapse instantly. You pat his arm. They're kids. It's about imagination. He looks unconvinced. Then he lifts a thin volume published far more recently. It's filled with quotes attributed to him. Some real, some fake, some painfully inaccurate. He sighs. I did not say half of these things. Welcome to the internet, you whisper. The what? Never mind. He turns to the back of the table where a final stack of papers rests, these written by scholars of the 21st century. Analytical, enthusiastic, sometimes a little obsessed. You read a headline aloud. Leonardo da Vinci, the first futurist. Another. Why Leonardo's inventions still inspire modern engineering. Another. Decoding Leonardo's lost robotic genius. Leonardo frowns. They call me many things. You were many things. He considers that, then nods. Open scholarly debate rises into your thoughts. Historians still argue about Leonardo's legacy, what he truly invented, what he merely theorized, what he dreamed, versus what he meant to build. Some say he was a scientist ahead of his time. Others argue he was primarily an artist experimenting with physics. Some call him the first engineer. Others call him the ultimate philosopher of nature. A few insist we've mythologized him beyond recognition. Leonardo closes the final book softly. They see me as they need to, he says, not as I am. You study his profile in the candlelight. He looks thoughtful. Older in a way genius rarely appears like he can feel the centuries pressing against him. But does it bother you? You ask gently. He thinks for a long moment. The silence hums. No, he says finally. A mind is larger once it is misunderstood. It grows in the space between truth and imagination. You stare at him, stunned. That, you say softly, is the most Leonardo thing you have ever said. He waves you off. Then he walks slowly toward the far end of the workshop where the candles are dimmer, the models smaller, the atmosphere gentler. He pauses. There is one last place, he says quietly, where the inventions fade, where the mind rests. You swallow. You're about to enter the final sketches, Leonardo's last, quiet ideas. Leonardo walks slowly now, the restless energy that fueled flying machines and armored tanks softening into something quieter, something almost fragile. He moves toward a small wooden desk tucked near the back wall. You didn't notice it earlier because everything around it is so spectacular, giant crossbows, hydraulic models, musical machines, but here, in this simple corner, the air feels different, gentler. He places a hand on the desk. Here, he murmurs, is where the inventions became, whispers. You step closer. Laid across the surface are delicate sketches so faint you almost miss them. Not the bold lines of war machines, nor the sprawling geometry of cities, nor the intricate anatomy studies. These lines look like they were made late at night, when the candles burned low and the world went quiet. The first drawing is a small contraption, two curved metal arms connected by a simple spring. It looks like a pair of eyeglasses, except the lenses are missing. Leonardo taps it lightly. For magnifying work, he explains, something easier than a hand lens. A tool for old men who wish to see small wonders. You smile. It's so unassuming, so human. A mainstream historical fact emerges. Leonardo suffered from declining eyesight late in life and tinkered with various optical aids, though few became formal inventions. But this feels like something he made for himself. He slides the parchment aside and reveals another sketch. A tiny spinning toy, shaped like a bird. Its wings attached to a central rod, designed to flutter when twisted and released. For children, he says softly, and perhaps for tired minds. You run your fingers near the drawing without touching it. Did you ever build it? He shakes his head. No, but I liked imagining it. That simple sentence lingers, warm and faintly sad. Then he lifts the next page, and your breath catches. It's a sketch of an old man sleeping in a chair, his robe pooling around him like a small ocean. His face is peaceful. His hands are folded. The lines are tender, soft, capturing rest in a way mechanical drawings never could. That is not an invention, you whisper. Leonardo's voice lowers. No, only a reminder. A reminder of what? You wonder. Rest? Mortality? The quiet between ideas? He moves on. The next sketch is of a small device, an adjustable stand with an arm meant to hold a candle at various angles. For painting in low light, he explains, so the shadows fall where I want them. A quirky tidbit floats up. Leonardo was notorious for adjusting lighting obsessively while painting, sometimes spending hours positioning a single candle. This simple device seems almost comically modest for a man who built siege engines. He flips to another sheet. This one shows a folding stool light, compact, elegant. For old bones, he mutters, rubbing his lower back. You grin. He pretends not to notice. Then he stops at the final drawing in the stack. A feather. A single feather, drawn with such delicacy you half expect it to drift away. Under it, he wrote backwards, barely visible. Everything begins with softness. You swallow a lump in your throat. You drew this? Near the end? Leonardo nods. When I no longer built machines for men, only ideas for myself. He picks up a small bound booklet, one that looks newer than the others. The pages inside are mostly blank, with only the first few containing faint sketches. Plants, birds, the curve of a riverbank, shapes that soothe instead of challenge. You stopped inventing? You ask quietly. He shakes his head. No, I simply began inventing gently. He closes the booklet and sets it down carefully, almost reverently. Then he walks to the window. Outside, the night is deep, still. A breeze nudges the shutters. Candlelight dances on the stone floor. Behind him sits the entire spectrum of human ambition. Flight, war, optics, anatomy, hydraulics, music, geometry. And here, at the very end, a feather. He turns to you one last time. You have seen my loud ideas, he says. But the quiet ones, those are the ones I wish had lived. The workshop seems to exhale. You look at the scattered sketches, the soft inventions, the gentle designs meant not for power or glory, but for comfort, ease, and simple delight. They feel like the closing thoughts of a mind that spent a lifetime outrunning the world, only to slow down, finally, and breathe. Leonardo lights one more candle and places it by the final drawings. The world remembers the noise, he murmurs, but genius rests in the silence. The flame flickers, the workshop dims. This is where the journey ends. The room grows softer now, as if Leonardo's inventions themselves are settling into sleep. The light from the final candle melts across the scattered papers, turning their edges to gold. You let your eyes wander slowly, gently, across each object, each fragment of brilliance, and the details begin to blur into a warm haze. The mechanical night seems less imposing now, the wings less restless, the gears less urgent. Everything feels quieter, calmer, as though the inventions have whispered their stories and now finally drift back into stillness. You take a slow breath. The air here is cooler, carrying the faint scent of wax and old parchment. It wraps around you like a blanket. Even the shadows move differently, stretching long and low, softening at the edges like fading ink. Your thoughts begin to drift too, following the gentle curve of the feather Leonardo drew, the simplest and softest idea in this entire room. Imagine the candlelight dimming. Imagine the night outside deepening into velvet blue. Imagine each invention closing its figurative eyes, one by one, like returning them carefully to their dreams. Let the last echoes of the workshop fade, the ticking gears and fluttering sketches dissolving into quiet hums at the edge of hearing. You feel your body lighten, your breathing deepen, your mind loosen its grip on the day. You've walked through genius tonight, not the noisy kind that demands attention, but the quiet kind that lingers like a warm whisper. And now it's time to let go. Let the final candle burn low. Let the quiet settle. Let sleep come gently, in soft spirals. The inventions fade, the night softens, and you drift,